Hey everyone, after another short hiatus, welcome to the first episode of NU Takes Season 2. My name is Michael Barthelemy.
And I'm Didi, and we're here to give our own hot takes and spicy opinions about all things Northwestern sports. Today, we're joined by our very own co-editor-in-chief of Inside NU, Ben Chasen.
What's up, y'all?
Yep, great to have Ben in. We have, for our first episode of Season 2, we're looking into the upcoming football season and we're going to do an offensive preview. So let's get into it.
The first thing on everyone's mind, who's going to be lining up under center? So 2021 is expected to be the third season in a row where a transfer QB could take over the reins. In 2020, we saw the highs of what a transfer could do with Peyton Ramsey, and in 2019, we saw the lows with Hunter Johnson. This year's QB battle seems to be between South Carolina transfer Ryan Hilinski and Hunter Johnson, who's hoping to redeem himself in his final season at Northwestern. So, Ben, who do you think the better choice is to win the job for week one?
I think that it is close and that both have upsides, but I would go with Hilinski just based off of what we know, especially when you look at the wide receiver core, and we'll get into this later in the episode. But I really expect Stephon Robinson Jr. to be the dominant wideout of this group. He's the one with the most experience. He comes in from Kansas. He's a fast guy who will really excel in kind of catching short to mid-range passes quickly after the snap. Those are the types of plays that we saw Ryan Hilinski really excel in at South Carolina. This is not to like slight Hunter Johnson in any way, shape, or form. I'm definitely a believer in the school of thought that Johnson was kind of less of a product of his own failures and maybe more a product of the situation surrounding him during his first year at Northwestern. Mick McCall's general incompetence in the offensive scheme. That said, I don't think he is as good of a pure passer as Ryan Hilinski. Ryan Hilinski, not nearly as mobile as Hunter Johnson, and that could come back to bite him when you have as strong of a backfield as I believe Northwestern has at running back. But just given the strengths of this wide receiver core, especially with less of a John Rain deep threat at tight end, and I love that we're saying tight end and not super back because it's only the second year of doing that, but Charlie Mangieri is probably also going to excel more on short routes where he can kind of run up the middle. I really trust Hilinski's ability to make good, quick decisions. He struggles a little bit with accuracy and decision-making downfield, but he's really good at making those short throws. So if I was Pat Fitzgerald, if I were Mike Bajakian, the pick for me would be Ryan Hilinski, but it's close, and I could see them going with either one.
Mm-hmm. I love what you're talking about there. I think Hilinski is the way to go as well. I mean, he came in as a true freshman in the SEC, and I mean, let's be honest, it just means more in the SEC. And he put up much better numbers than Johnson. And sure, Northwestern system in 2019 was pretty tragic, but I mean, to throw under 50% against UNLV, and that being his best game, for Hunter Johnson to have 4 games of 17 plus throwing attempts and under 90 yards. That's just a combination of incompetence by the offensive scheme and then also just from the quarterback position. It seemed like the game was just kind of ahead of him. He had a lot of questions with decision making. And Hilinski, in 4 times the amount of throwing attempts, had completion percentage at 58% to Hunter Johnson's 46%. And he performed pretty well for the SEC. For a South Carolina team that's not that great. Like the starting situation last year in 2020 was kind of difficult because their new offensive coordinator, Mike Bobo, brought in his guy, Colin Hill from Colorado State. He went with his guy. Colin Hill did decent, but I mean, in my mind, Mike Bobo is more like Mike Bozo for not starting Ryan Hilinski. So I think that he'll be solid for the Cats.
Yeah, I mean, I see what both of you guys are saying. I think that there's definitely kind of a baseline level of competence that we could expect if Hilinski were to start. But I think that, I've got a lot of faith in Johnson. I've been saying this ever since, I wanted him to get some reps last year. And again, I know 2019 was a train wreck, absolute disaster. But I think when you really look at all the outside factors that went into Johnson's season that year, I think it's like, I don't want to, cut him all this slack or say that none of it was his fault. But I mean, he was dealing with, obviously his mother having breast cancer. And something I think that I didn't realize until recently, he said it in an interview. he said he was pretty busy with school. He's saying that now that he's graduated, he's working on a master's, that school is something he doesn't think about as much. Obviously, as Northwestern students, I think we know kind of how big of a burden schoolwork can be. And I think that's something we don't really think about with a lot of players. We don't really think about, oh, they're student athletes. We think, oh, they got to spend the off season training and doing this or that. But for someone like Johnson, it seems like that was, priority for him. And I think when it comes to his potential, I think it's just through the roof. Helinski, yeah, I think Helinski's a great quarterback, and I think from what we've seen, he can make the good short reads. But I think Johnson, I mean, out of high school, I know high school for him was close to 5 years ago, but he was a 5-star recruit. He was a 5-star recruit. I think that he can throw every kind of pass. He's mobile, like you said, and I think that that's the exactly kind of quarterback that would fit into the kind of scheme that Jake was running last year. Rollouts to the right, QB options, and I think given the potential weapons that he has at wide receiver, I think that kind of mobility is going to be extremely important. I think that can't be an offense that passes the ball 30 or 40 times a game, and I think that the talent of a wide receiver is less than at South Carolina. So I think that Johnson's going to be able to get out of those tight situations better than someone like Klinsky. I do agree it's going to be close, but I mean, I think it's going to be Johnson.
Do you not have concerns though about, I mean, like his numbers in 2019 were so bad that it's like could just be in his head at this point that it's just he's got to go back on the field and defeat all the demons that were surrounding him in 2019 that led him to have one of the worst seasons that we've seen, to be one of the worst offenses in the whole country, where he was kind of the head of that because, I mean, he just was straight up terrible in almost all of his games.
I've got concerns, but at the same time, the pressure is totally off him now. If Helinski comes in and everyone's like, oh, this guy's going to be the starter, not totally off of him, but I think there's a lot less pressure on him now. No one's looking at Hunter Johnson being like, you are the one who needs to come in. People are saying, oh, you could be a serviceable backup to this guy we just got. And I think that, I think he's going to play with a chip on his shoulder. And I think he's going to have a good season. I think the fact that there even is, this quarterback battle in the first place, it didn't seem like there was one last year, shows maybe the limits of Helinski's ceiling and also how high Johnson could potentially rise.
A few things. Thing number one, yes, Hunter Johnson was a 5-star recruit out of high school. Ryan Helinski was a top 50 recruit out of high school. I see like the 5 and 4-star ratings as semi-arbitrary a lot of the time, where you get to that upper echelon of recruits and you do really have pure raw talent there. So if we're going to discount Ryan Helinski because he was somewhat less of a strong recruit, I believe he was the second highest pocket passer in his recruiting class, potentially behind, I think, Spencer Radler, who is now probably considered the Heisman favorite for this year. So I don't want to discount Ryan Helinski on a talent basis. I do kind of agree that you've got Hunter Johnson now with almost nothing to lose because he's already lost the starting job last year. We saw Andrew Marty get more snaps than him last year, if I'm correct. So I don't know if the floor is much further right now for Johnson than it could possibly be. I, at the same time, feel like Helinski wouldn't have transferred to Northwestern. He probably had a ton of offers, as I think all of us would probably agree. Helinski probably should have been the starter at South Carolina last year, and there are a lot of coaches in new jobs this year who were coaching at South Carolina potentially as a result of that. So I just genuinely believe that he would not have come to NU if he didn't feel like there was a very good chance he was going to be able to win that starting job. And so whether or not there is validity to the point with Johnson competing and potentially winning the starting job, I feel like Helinski at least expects to win the starting job. Potentially at some point we could see Helinski go down with an injury. And then I feel like you really get to the point where Hunter Johnson's got something to prove and you could see something out of him.
I mean, I think maybe Helinski came in with the expectation that I don't think in any Power 5 program there's an expectation, you can transfer in and, oh, the starting job's going to be yours. I think that maybe, he saw the fact that Hunter Johnson, he didn't know what to expect out of Hunter Johnson. And I think in terms of talent basis, I think, I don't want to discount Helinski based off his high school rating, but I just think in terms of offensive scheme, right, he's a pure pocket passer. And the fact of the matter is that Northwestern receivers, at least as we've seen since Austin Carr, cannot really create a lot of individual separation on their own. And I think when the pocket collapses, which is what we saw time and time again last year, which is part of what made Peyton Ramsey, so good for Northwestern. I just don't know if Helinski is going to be able to get out of those situations.
Much of what made Northwestern so great last season is the abundance of veteran leadership, such as a Peyton Ramsey. 7 of Northwestern's 2020 offensive starters were seniors, including all 3 receivers and a tight end. So, Didi, who do you think will step up to be the number 1 receiver for Northwestern?
Yeah, I mean, obviously this is going to be a really important question, and this is going to be a hot take, but I think it's going to be Wayne Dennis Jr. I know he has 2 lifetime catches as a Northwestern Wildcat. I know that, I don't think that, I don't think he's going to be by and far away, the guy. I don't think he's going to have, a 1,000-yard season. But I think when it comes down to it at the end of the season, I think it's like if you want to make a play, I think he's going to be the guy that'll make that play. Obviously, Stephen Robinson, I think, is going to provide tremendous value for Northwestern. I think he's gonna have a great season. I mean, like Ben was saying, he's quick, he's got good hands, he's got experience, and he's been able to show that off, at a college level, at a Power 5 level. But I think that Robinson brings something to the table that has been absent in the Northwestern offenses for as long as I can remember, and that's kind of that's his height. At 6'3", he's quick. He's physical. I mean, we saw again. I know it's a very limited sample size, but I think that the buzz around him has always been high in terms of his potential upside. I think that we saw in that one catch that he had against Auburn that he has that ability to kind of stretch the field and attack the defense in all sorts of ways that someone that's 5'10", 5'11" simply can't do. I think that especially if we've got a talented passer like Johnson, again, knock on wood, talented, or Helinski, no matter who's throwing him the ball, I think to be able to have a potential, deep threat guy you can just kind of lob it up to, goal line fade, I think that could be a real game changer for Northwestern.
Ben, you were harping on Robinson before. Is he your guy that you see to be the number 1 receiver?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a Northwestern fan and you liked Kyrick McGowan last year, or you liked Kyrick McGowan, period, and you like a guy who has speed, and this is actually kind of interesting because I always thought of him as like the short guy who will be like shifty and make things work with his agility of that wide receiver room. He's actually taller at 5'10" than Malik Washington is at 5'9", which I did not expect, but very, very fast, very, very agile. I expect him to be the lead receiver this year for Northwestern. I also, kind of like Didi said, don't expect this to be like a one-man dominant receiving group, which we haven't really seen. RCB was somewhat of that last year, but we definitely didn't see it in the 2019 season. We have not seen in a while at Northwestern. Where I'm coming from with Robinson is that he's a new infusion of energy. He is in a room of younger players or less experienced players, someone who has a lot of college playing time under his belt. And I just think that he brings a burst potentially, and you could see him used in option schemes potentially. It very well could be Johnson, but if Helinski is the starter, you're going to need someone who can kind of make plays for himself. I think that is Stephon Robinson more than anybody else.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I love Robinson's versatility. I mean, I was a huge fan of Kyrick McGowan last year because he was able to work the screen. We didn't really see it, but he could go deep. He could run a slant in the route. He could take off on a jet sweep. He just brought a lot of flair to Northwestern that they didn't really have in other receivers. I think early on, though, I would go with, I mean, this is kind of a hack, but Cam Porter. I mean, Cam Porter, I think early on in the first couple of games is going to be like the lead guy, just because we've talked about it with there's a general lack of production that's come from these guys. There are a lot of unknowns with most of the receivers, Stephon Robinson being the only guy who has really played like a full season starting. And yes, he did really well, but also he missed pretty much the entire year last year with injury, and he's coming into a new program. There might be like an adjustment period for him. I think with the new quarterbacks, Hunter Johnson, we'll mark him as a new quarterback just because like 2019, we'll just like pretend it didn't happen for now. But he's going to be coming into a new role being a starter if he's the starter. Helinski's coming into a new program if he is the starter, and Both of those guys, I think, will need like adjustment periods, and the receivers will need adjustment periods. And the guy who will be all reliable will become Cam Porter because he was really good last year. And sure, he only had 9 receptions last year, but believe it or not, that's the most receptions of any returning player in 2020. So hey, he's really like one of the more experienced receivers on this squad, and he has the explosiveness that I think that he can create create stuff in the checkdowns and do a little bit of this, do a little bit of that. And he's not going to rack up crazy yardage, but I think that he'll be a target for much of the early season as the offense becomes adjusted and grows into its own.
Let me say this. If Cam Porter is the leading receiver for Northwestern against Michigan State, they are going to lose to Michigan State. Mark my words on that. Think about, and you referenced that like Stephon Robinson coming in as a new guy who was injured a lot of last year and potentially might have like a little bit of growing pains adjusting the program. Last year in the first game against Maryland, who was Northwestern's leader in receptions? John Rain, who was new to the program. He had 5 receptions and 53 yards, which again, not that stunning of a receiving stat line, but all I'm saying here is that like if Cam Porter, who is a running back and who is not, again, I like Cam Porter a lot, and I think his strength is in the fact that he can kind of burst through the line and create plays for himself past the line. And again, that's with a strong offensive line already at Northwestern. I don't think he's a speed guy necessarily, and so I don't really expect him to be like a consistent like pass catching back. I guess he kind of potentially looks a little bit like a Clyde Edwards-Helaire comparison, but I just genuinely believe that if Cam Porter, after all of this talk about, well, who's going to step up a wide receiver and all of these options and the transfer in of Robinson, if he is the guy who is the go-to receiver in the first game in a Big Ten game under the lights, Ryan Field on September 3rd, it's going to be a disappointing night for Northwestern fans. So I hope it's not Cam Porter who is leading the receiving corps at running back early on, and I don't think it will be.
I'd really like to see Northwestern try to take a step forward with their offense this year. I think that they've got 2 talented quarterbacks. Whether it is to say that they're going to be how good they are, that's that's to be determined. But I think they're both very, very talented passers, and I think that I'd want to see someone like Wayne Dennis again, to bring that name up. I want to see him. Take chances. I want to see him throw the ball more than 30 yards downfield. Again, back to Stephon Robinson. I just obviously, it's kind of ironic with Northwestern having had Austin Carr and Flint Nagel, but it's hard for me to see a 5'10" wide receiver kind of being the guy that opposing defenses, are going to be all over. I think that he can definitely, again, he's going to have an impact, but I think when it comes to the go-to guy, I'd wanted to see it be someone with some size who can, hurt opposing defenses all over the field, kind of like RCB did last year.
We move on to general viewpoint of the offense, because year 1 of the Bajakian offense was full of twists and turns. The Cats began the season in their more traditional run-first scheme that Wildcat fans have known and grown to love, especially with guys like Justin Jackson. But towards the end and middle of the seasons, there was a greater emphasis put on the aerial attack. Does the offense need to be pass first or run first in order for Northwestern to put points on the board? I'll shoot it over to Ben first.
Yeah, sign me up as the president of the Cam Porter for Heisman Committee, because I think that Northwestern is going to be a run-first team this year, and I think that it will serve them well, provided that there is enough of a pass attack for the offense to not be completely one-dimensional. So I think that they are a run-first team this year. I just really like all of the options at running back. I obviously love Cam Porter. I think that he has NFL potential. I think that he, again, like, we're looking at the strongest Northwestern running back since Justin Jackson, potentially since Darnell Autry. I really think that Northwestern has a real gem in Cam Porter. But below Cam Porter, Andrew Clare, who's coming in and is more of a speed guy than anyone in the backfield. We've seen Evan Hull have surprisingly good moments. We've seen a lot of hype come out of high school with Anthony Tyus. So all 4 of those guys are really, really strong running backs, or at least could be really, really strong running backs. And I think all 4 of those guys could start on certain other Big Ten rosters elsewhere. not all 4 of them will start at Northwestern, and the obvious go-to is probably going to be Porter, at least to start the season. But I just genuinely feel like when you have that much talent in the running back room and a lot of guys who can hit you not in the same way, but in slightly different ways each, that creates a lot of potential for Northwestern to be a run first offense. But if you have Ryan Holinsky starting, you probably can't rely on very much of a run game from your QB. So that's the one downside. Still, though, I think that it's a run first offense.
Run first offense, I think there's obviously a lot of talent at running back, a lot of talent at offensive line. Those are really Northwestern's two most reliable, known, strong positional groups. But I think we need to transition to a pass reliant system for Northwestern. I think that there's too much talent at quarterback to not spread things out, whether it be Ryan Holinsky or it be Hunter Johnson. We talked about earlier, we don't want to rely too much on high school ratings, but to have a 4-star and a 5-star, that's very different from what Northwestern's been dealing with in the past. That's a lot of talent that you can, the raw tools that you can just toy around with, play around with, a lot of arm strength in both those guys. And I think that Cam Porter will get a lot of usage early, running and catching, and that it's going to be a lot of running early on, similar to last year. But I think when it's a tough opponent and it's an opponent that really matters in the middle of the season, like a Michigan and Iowa, Wisconsin and Minnesota, they're gonna have to throw the ball because you can't not put an emphasis on the pass because the defense is not the same as last year. We don't have the Irish law firm. We don't have a Greg Newsome. There is a need for Northwestern to put up points because their defense is not going to do as much. And so the best way to do that is just to spread things out. And sure, there may not be the abundance of talent that you would want in a traditional spread offense at receiver, but I think guys will step up. And I think that Northwestern will have to just progress their offense to be more into throwing the deep ball, more into just general passing the ball, moving through the air, because that's how you pick up chunks of yards and that's how you put up a lot of points.
Yeah, I mean, the big thing to me is going to be, kind of how the offense changes depending on how good the defense is. I think that, obviously we have to regress as a defense after being literally the best defense in college football last year. Or at least, hopefully not. But I think that the defense will regress. And I think that, like Michael said, that given the talent at quarterback and, I think the potential at wide receiver, I think that this has to be a pass first offense and that can open up the running game, maybe in sort of a similar way to Ohio State last year, where we saw Justin Fields, obviously he could sling it, he could, toss toss like a 50-yard touchdown, and then their running game would decimate you, kind of like how Northwestern lost in the Big Ten championship. I think that Northwestern is going to have to be able to establish that early on, and I think that some mistakes are going to be totally fine. If whoever's starting quarterback throws an interception or two, last year that could have been the end of a game. But I think that in a pass first offense, where hopefully the offense will be able to take a step up, I think that's going to be necessary if Northwestern wants to kind of retain the success that they had from last year, and if they want to take a step forward in the program itself. It can't just be little dunk offs, like dunk passes, or short yardage gains. I think if we're a run first offense, we're not going to see Cam Porter ripping off 40, 50-yard runs all the time. But I think if we can have a passing attack that's respected by other teams, then that's when we could really see what the running game can do.
I just genuinely don't buy into the fact that, like, unless you have a standout QB, which, like, we'll see if Hunter Johnson can develop into what Northwestern fans thought he really was going to be going into the 2019 season, or if Ryan Holinsky can play up to, I think, what his potential is, which is very similar to the potential of Johnson in terms of overall production, then yeah, Northwestern could be a pass first offense. But in the Big Ten, which is just punch you in the mouth, gridiron football, I do think unless you have a standout guy like that, we've seen it with Michael Penix Jr. at Indiana. We obviously have seen it at Ohio State with a variety of guys. Unless you have some really, really, really stellar guys at QB, you're not really going to be able to rely that heavily on the pass and get away with it Defenses create a lot of turnovers. Pass rush is ferocious. Linebackers will swallow up mid-range passes pretty quickly, because the defenses in the Big Ten, I think, across the board are very strong. So I just genuinely feel like this is a run-first conference unless otherwise proven, and I don't know if the proof is there for Northwestern yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the way Northwestern played last year, while obviously it yielded a great record, I think that to try to rely on that sort of defense. I mean, defense wins games, and let's limit, like, let's have 0 or 1 turnover a game. I think that can be like a consistent model of decent success, but I think that can also lead to seasons like 2019, where you've got so many possessions that are run first down, run second down, pick up 4 total yards, and then you're in a position 3rd and 6 where you're putting your quarterback in a position of pressure to make a play.
And do you think this offense is going to progress from last season, or is it going to regress and look more like 2019? Well, maybe not like 2019, but slightly better, like an upgraded version.
Can I take the hot take, which I think most people, I don't know what the expectation actually is amongst people as a whole here. I've heard a lot of mixed things. I expect them to progress. I expect with a year older of that running back room, I expect that maybe the quarterback play won't be as strong as Peyton Ramsey provided last year, but I think it will be passable. I think that Pete Skoronski is going to continue to raise hell and be an anchor of that offensive line, and that the offensive line won't regress as much as some people might expect it to. I think the wide receiver room will be passable, and provided that Charlie Mangieri doesn't get hurt, there will be a tight end there who can at least kind of stand in that role. And I think Mike Pajakian is a great offensive coordinator. Really what it comes down to is it's his second year now with his hands all over this program. I really have a lot of trust and faith in him. And so I really do expect Northwestern to take a step forward offensively. I don't know if it will account for what I expect to be a slight step back, at least defensively. But I do expect there to be at least some progress across the board on the offensive side of the football.
And to me, the biggest part of I agree with that. I think that I would assume that most people are split on whether the offense is going to get better or worse. But I think the biggest part of the reasons why I'm optimistic is the offensive line. I think that it's going to take a step forward this year. It's Kurt Anderson's, I believe, fourth year with the program. He's got a lot of his recruits now in. We saw how he developed guys like Skoronski and Slater. And I think that if the offensive line can be better and more consistent than it was last year, I mean, we saw offensive line not cost us the game against Michigan State, but it put us in a tough position to win. I think that our offensive line can be consistent, can be good, can be better than last year. I think that even a slight decline in quarterback play and potentially wide receiver play can be kind of evened out.
It's the end of the show. Let's inject a little Northwestern propaganda into my veins, because I also like the idea of this offense. I think it's going to be pretty good this year, and I think it'll be better than last year. I think last year the offense was at times very stagnant, very restricted, and I think that I love Peyton Ramsey, but I think that came a little bit just to his like general just lack of like consistent arm strength, and the wide receivers lack of ability to create separation. I think that we could see with a upgraded running game, we could see things open up a little bit for these receivers. And I think there's just a general more talent in the arm for these quarterbacks. And I think also the offensive line is going to be really good, as you guys both touched on, because Skoronski, we know Skoronski's a dog. We know Sam Jarrett's really good. I mean, and those two newcomers who are coming in at guard, Josh Preby and Charlie Schmidt. I mean, I shout out Westlot Pirates because I saw this GIF sort of recently, and it was of the two of them against Maryland coming in when it was a blowout and pancake two guys. And instantly oh, okay. So they're serviceable. They're good guards. So now I'm all in on them being Northwestern's guards, just solely off of that GIF. But I think the running game will excel because of the offensive line. I think the offensive line will excel because of the talent in the running game. And I think that the quarterback's going to excel just because of all the talent around Northwestern. There's a lot of talent in all the skill positions. So while I don't think Northwestern's going to be putting up 30, 40 points a game, but I don't know if we'll be seeing as many stinkers as Northwestern sort of put up in a few of those games last year, like a Michigan State. that wraps up the first episode of season 2 for NU Takes. I want to thank Ben Chasen for coming on with us. And as always, I'm Michael Bartholomew.
I'm Didi.
We'll see you next week.